What is your greatest fear? Statistically, it's probably bugs, or heights, or death, or I don't know, talking with people? Whatever your answer may be, I believe that everyone has at least one fear. And as I have recently discovered, this also applies to fictional characters. For the longest time, I never gave my characters any fears, or even any flaws while we're on the topic. If I wrote anything, it was always pretty surface level. Just a few personality traits, maybe a hobby or two if they were lucky. But Halloween is a season of spooks and scares, and who would I be if I didn't indulge in the festivities? If you couldn't tell, this was scripted before Halloween. Let's force my characters into their worst nightmares, for the sake of character development, of course. The story of this first scary situation starts with one of the drawings from my failed Inktober 2025 challenge. A small bit of necessary context here is that the prompts here are not the official Inktober prompts, because I decided that this year I was going to make my own prompt list by using a random word generator website. If I drew more than 4 days worth of prompts, that would be the subject of the video you're watching right now. However, this small chunk of backstory transitions quite nicely into how I came up with the idea for this final drawing. When I saw that my drawing prompt for day 3 was "it admits," I figured out pretty quickly that I wanted Celine to admit that she was afraid of ghosts to an actual ghost. That's a pretty inconvenient fear to have when the whole story centers around the ghost. The basic premise here is that this is the moment Celine first admits out loud that she's afraid of ghosts to anyone. One little detail that I believe I have failed to mention previously is that the only reason she's in this haunted house in the first place is that she agreed to do camera work for her YouTuber friend Finn over here, who wants to prove that the paranormal is out there because he likes ghosts or something. Certainly a conflict of interest, but how was he supposed to know? She didn't even tell anyone she was afraid of ghosts. I don't think this drawing would have worked if there wasn't any dialogue to explain it, so I decided to take almost a comic-like approach to the whole situation, and the comic bubbles fit into the composition way better than I initially expected. And look, I know I drew 3 full-body characters, had to do 2 sketches and line art, and have a fully fledged background in there as well, but I'm still so surprised at how this took me 9 full hours to finish, like I thought it would take me any less. But hey, I like how it turned out, so I guess it's worth it in the end. However, the more I look at this drawing, the more I think that this is only scratching the surface of spooky possibilities. Sure, she's facing her greatest fear on a technicality, but what's actually going through her mind whenever she thinks of a ghost? Though my Inktober challenge failed to become a month-long habit and turned into nothing more than a 4-day-long time sink in the end, I did gain something. More drawing ideas. Where the last drawing was more of a joke or like a punchline, I wanted this next drawing to have more of a serious tone this time around. This one was inspired by sort of curiosity of mine. I wanted to explore why Celine was so scared of ghosts in the first place. After giving the question some thought, the answer came quite simply to me. Possession! Can I be honest? I kind of forgot that the whole point of ghosts was that they were able to possess people. For a while, I really thought that the scariest part about it is the fact that there's an invisible angry dead person in your house, and they like knock over a vase or something. However, the loss of autonomy that comes with being possessed sounds like quite the scare. I feel like this is at the core of what scares Celine the most about ghosts. They could puppeteer her around and do literally whatever, and she'd have no say in the matter. Pretty terrifying if I do say so myself. Fortunately for her, that's not quite how ghosts work in the story I've created in my head. I imagine that you'd have to know the human body and how it works really, really well in order to even have a clue on how to move them around. As a ghost, I mean. Also, an important distinction to make here is that all of these upcoming drawings may not represent what is actually going on in reality. They are, as I mentioned previously, nightmares. Ooh, here's an intermission. One of my biggest fears is spiders with really long legs getting real close to me. For drawing 1.5 here, I have recreated what happened to me one scary night, just sitting on the couch, video editing. I was like, maybe I'll stay up more, right? Little did I know. I see something in front of me. I think it's a hairball at first, and then I look at it for more than a second. I'm like, oh, that is a spider. A spider appears in front of me. I dodge around it, and then I look up and I realize that instead of being on any number of walls or surfaces, it decided to use its string to go directly in front of me. It wanted to make eye contact with me. Oh my god, my heart jumped out of my chest. It sunk to the floor. and I ran away to my room. I'm still baffled as to like why that spider chose right in front of me to just be in front of. So you know how the first drawing had a clear and concise fear I could easily portray in the form of a drawing? God, I wish I could say the same for this. The best way I could possibly conceive of getting the idea across to you is to start by introducing the characters first and explaining how they relate to the big fear afterwards. So forgive me if I don't get to the point right away. The guy at the bottom of the hourglass is Ace. He's usually been pretty positive and smiling in his drawings until now. Something seems to be bothering him. I couldn't possibly know what. You see, I've never really shared anything about his backstory before, but he's always been the very first person to be entered into the time loop, or at least the very first to make it out alive, because this is a time loop story. He was under the impression that he would be the only one who ever had to be put through the time loop if he was able to make it out of there in one piece. Now, the girl at the top of the hourglass is Irene, who, as of the beginning of the plot, was just recently thrown into all this time loop nonsense. Irene being put into a time loop like this makes Ace's greatest fear realized. The fear in question is this whole time loop thing going on forever and ever in some kind of sick and twisted, unending cycle. And in a way, it's kind of a whole plot of the story. The fun part is that he wasn't even supposed to know. He and Irene just kind of crossed paths one day, and he just connected the dots rather quickly. One thing to note is that I know I said that fear is the whole plot of the story, but like, I know I said the fear has been realized and it's basically the whole plot of the story, but they don't actually climb into hourglasses. It's symbolic, more like. I mean, the clover fields behind it is how I imagine it to look like, and there would surely be an hourglass in there. I don't think the characters would get inside of the hourglass. Back to the drawing. Since this fear is abstract and a bit difficult to convey through a drawing, I also noticed that it took on the secondary meaning of fearing the passage of time. And the more I think about it, the more it makes sense. The way the time loop works is that every day repeats 7 times, and this goes on for a month. Naturally, after something like that, your sense of how time works is bound to get a little messed up. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be them. Technically I can because I wrote them, but shh. Now, in the story, there's supposed to be some sort of time deity that is responsible for all the time loops. I don't have a design or even much of a concept for this being who is responsible for all this time-related chaos, so I chose to represent it as this mischievous pair of eyes, up to no good. The background being all blurry like that was one big happy accident. The reason it's like that is because I managed to mess up the horizon line at some point when I was doing the line art for the bushes, but when I tried resizing the whole layer to fix things up, that also didn't look quite right. But right when I was about to give up, I lowered the opacity of one layer, and the result looked quite cool actually. So I decided to keep it in the end. This third drawing is interesting, because instead of this drawing being a hypothetical worst-case scenario, we instead have Evelyn over here feeling guilt over something that has already happened. To catch up anyone who hasn't seen her or her story before, once upon a time, Evelyn received an offer to become immortal through an experimental procedure, and one of the side effects was that she went to sleep for a really long time. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I am just describing a coma. However, then, when she awoke, the world around her fell into ruin. Now she stares at the rubble around her at a loss for words. Also, there's a solar eclipse happening in here because I think it looks cool. I imagine this moment to be the moment when it really sinks in that our world will never be the same again. You might have noticed by now there are more ghosts in this drawing, even more than the previous one actually, though they take a different shape here. In my defense, how are you supposed to not see ghosts when your world that used to be filled with people suddenly falls silent? But these ghosts are more like shadows or like absences more than spirits, because at this point she has forgotten what a person even looks like, which is kind of crazy considering that even after all of that, she still wants to help humanity and is desperately searching for any other survivors. She really just has her own reflection to go off of at this point. In her normal design, Evelyn has an eye patch. I was curious for what would happen if she didn't have an eye patch on. In this drawing, that means her not having a right pupil, but maybe I'll try playing around with it a little more. As you could see, the background behind her is like a ruined city. Like you could see like a highway crumbling apart, buildings falling, and clouds. That's what you woke up from, because I guess that's where the nearest hospital was, I guess. And you know, this is really fun because it looks really similar to my very first concept art for this whole series. That's it for this video, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to see what I'm up to nowadays, make sure to follow me on Blue Sky. That's pretty much the only place where I do anything anymore. See you guys around.